Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope yours are well. Been another eventful week in Scottish politics, and we've got lots to discuss and share with you. Don't forget to comment, don't forget to let us know what you guys are thinking as well. That's the most important part for us, to know that you're happy with what we're saying, or you're getting something out of it. So let me run right away there. Over in Edinburgh, we have got our favourite weatherman, our only weatherman. Mr. Conan, how are you?
I'm well. It's been an interesting week, Roddy, but we must press on. Good news to come.
Indeed, do we have. Well, one wee bit of bad news. Well, we get one back, we lose one. We lost Phil. Phil is actually up. We're recording this on Saturday, folks, and he's at the SSRG conference up in Dunfermline. And he had a choice to make, but we like to practice what we preach and support anything that helps the cause. And Phil decided he should go up there and make his speech there. And we will have to get by without him, but I'm sure we will, because we've got a wee surprise at the end. And up there in Clickmannon, we have our favourite lawyer, everybody's favourite lawyer. It's our Eva. Eva, how you doing?
Hi, morning both. Yeah, good. Nice, busy week, beautiful weather. Been out in the garden already this morning and big plans for what I'm going to plant today.
Good, that's what we like to hear. And up there in the City of Discovery, none other than Mr. Petrie. How are you, Mr. Petrie?
Hi, Roddy. We're doing well today. I too was supposed to be up at the conference. However, car trouble stopped me from getting there.
Oh, well, never mind. Phil will do it all for you when he's up there. And we didn't have Phil, but what we do, and it was on some of the news, in fact, what we're going to be talking about, I am absolutely delighted to welcome David McHutchon of Sovereignty. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well. We're delighted to be here, and the honour is all ours. I mean that very genuinely. We're obviously been aware for a long time of what you're doing, and so it's just great to be connecting. Should have happened earlier, but we've the grassroots of the independence movement is so selfless. And I think for those that have a bit of a platform, that have maybe positions and roles and responsibilities, it's really critical. We never let egos get in the way of cooperation. So we will do whatever it takes to contribute towards the goal that we're all working towards, to see a free and independent Scotland.
Yeah. That's great to have you, and I'm sure it'll be the first of many visits, and we look forward to that, and uniting and campaigning with your colleagues. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it was this week that Sovereignty got in touch with the Liberate Scotland, and discussions were held, and we decided to join up with us. And that will be our first topic today. So back to you, David. Can you, for the viewers, tell them, why was it that Sovereignty decided that Liberate Scotland was a good platform for them?
Well, first of all, it's really the credentials of those that are involved, people that are not pop-up activists, if you want to put it that way, that have years, decades, in many cases, of campaigning for Scottish independence. We were formed, I think, probably we basically exist for much of the same reasons that I for I, that ISP do, that Liberate Scotland, Salvo, Liberation, all these organisations and parties exist, which is because the SNP, which for decades had been entrusted to drive forward the cause of Scottish independence, has no plan, no agenda, there's no meaningful action, nothing is happening, and it's leading to frustration, and it's leading to a massive democratic deficit, because the Scottish people are after action on independence. They demonstrate that in election after election. And how democratic is it of the political class to ignore, suppress, silence those concerns? So Sovereignty was founded in 2020 on the 700th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath. And we want to carry forward that same spirit through drive forward the campaign for independence, to get independence over the line. That's what we're all about. That's what you're all about. Us doing our own thing, you doing your own thing, to us didn't seem to make any sense. So we reached out, and we are delighted to be cooperating with Liberate Scotland, to be joining Liberate Scotland. Really looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening over the next few years. It'll be exciting. Buckle up, get your seatbelts on, because I think we're going to actually start seeing some movement and action. And that is what the independence movement has been waiting for.
Absolutely, well said. And John, I can assure you, everyone in Liberate Scotland is every bit as delighted as you are to be there. I mean, when you were talking about decades, and some of us have been doing it for decades and decades, I knew you were referring to Lloyd, of course. He started with Robert Cunningham Graham back in the day. There you go. But Eva, we've noticed since we launched Liberate Scotland, there's a groundswell that we're not kidding ourselves on. There is a wave developing. All that, as David's alluded to, a bit of resentment, a bit of frustration, is people are finding a release here.
Well, there's a sense of urgency among those of us who've been campaigning for decades, and we've been in the doldrums in the last few years, principally because of the lack of action from the parties who were elected to gain our independence. And it was very disheartening to watch how the support for the SNP has continued to crumble, as support for the notion of independence has ever so slowly continued to rise to be at least the 50% mark. And to hear the vote SNP 1 and 2 mantra just grates on the ears, because we know it doesn't work. And if the impetus and if the aim and the ambition is to attain independence, and it's absolutely plain that will only be done by a united campaign. And thus far, the only people that seem not to accept that are the leadership of the SNP, because there are very many members of the SNP and their supporters within that part of the grassroots of the movement who've been in touch with us since Liberate Scotland launched, to explain that they are thinking, and they're putting themselves, foursquare behind us, because they agree that unity is the key. It's very easy to say it, but it is absolutely the reason why we've got together, because we all understand that collectively we're a far greater force than if we're fighting against each other. We say it every week. Scotland United will never be defeated, and that's the position. The union is at its weakest. People recognise that, whether it's activists or folk that just are supporters but are for various reasons not able to hit the streets, or folk who've been members of political parties for years who see that there is no real movement and there's no real plan or strategy within the leadership of the SNP. The other parties who have plans, obviously some have joined us, some haven't joined yet, but these talks will continue. The door remains open, because what's at stake is obviously the freedom, the self-determination of our country. So I'm heartened by the reactions that we've had. I'm heartened by the numbers and by the spirit. And people are really wanting to see the campaign taken off, because there's a lot of optimism that the Holyrood election next year will become a major platform for independence. It could be the independence election if there is unity and we fight together collectively against the better together forces of the union. Because make no mistake, they'll gang up against us as they did in 2014, and they'll do it at every election whenever they need to keep the independence movement down and failing to succeed. And if that happens, we've only ourselves to blame. And that's why the SNP have got to get on board and cooperate and have one candidate per constituency for independence and a proper organised presence on the list. And we'll take Holyrood by storm for the independence movement, and then we could be talking UDI.
Yeah, or alternative to that doesn't, folks, there could be a single Liberate candidate in every constituency in Scotland, and we'll still take it. But I would like to reiterate something Eva did say. The door has never been shut to anyone within the Liberate Scotland group. It won't be shut on anyone who wants to fight for independence. In fact, I put out a tweet just before we come on, Lloyd, which said, you know, one of the strengths we had in 2014 was the fact that there was people there left and right and centre politics, people with no political core. The SNP was a very small party actually at that time in comparison to what it became, but there was thousands, hundreds of thousands of us getting together. No one was falling out over policies or you're left wing, you're right wing, you're a liberal, whatever. And that's what we're trying to recreate in Liberate Scotland. But isn't it a joy when you see like Sovereignty joining us? We've managed to sit here with, you know, people from the left, the right, and the centre are all coming together and talking.
In some ways, what's the feeling I have at the moment is that feeling of the early days of 2014. You know, it began for me by bumping into someone who I'd known many years earlier in the SNP who had left. And in some ways, what you just said is absolutely true. It was a coming together of people who had become frustrated who had supported the creation of the Scottish Parliament, some who had not supported and saw the creation of the Scottish Parliament as being a blind alley. You know, these were the discussions and debates we had in the early part of the 20th century. But the coming together in 2014 was extraordinary because it was an ability to focus on one single issue with the understanding, the broad understanding that the other issues, the detail issues would be dealt with once we become an independent country and we have the formation of our own politics, genuinely Scottish politics, not Scottish politics as a subdivision of British politics. And I get the sense of this and the same feeling now. People have been in contact with me who were active in 2014, who felt deep frustration and are very, very angry, particularly with the leadership of the Scottish National Party, because as we've alluded to many, many occasions, in the period between the referendum itself in 2014 and now, the British state has never been in a weaker state, never been in a weaker state, certainly not in the 20th century and certainly not in my lifetime. And the fact that there was a failure to exploit that when the dogs in the street could tell you that Boris Johnson was not the answer, David Cameron wasn't the answer, that Theresa May was not the answer, and indeed that Keir Starmer wasn't the answer. The failure to take action at that particular point has led to a greater and greater frustration. And I think what we, or what Liberate Scotland has tapped into, is providing an outlet for that frustration, but not an outlet merely to express anger and disappointment, an outlet that can achieve something, an outlet that is a positive focus for all people's energies, both positive and negative. Myself, I'm utterly delighted that Sovereignty have come on board, primarily because very, very quietly, they have been working for the past 5 years. They've stood in elections. They haven't made the great statements of expectation that some political organisations at the point of their formation do. What they've done is they've got on quietly and done the work. And that in itself shows, without any shadow of the doubt, their commitment to the cause. And the commitment to the cause of independence is, without doubt, the most important element, and it is what unites us all. And ultimately, will unite the country. But great to have Sovereignty on board. Great, really.
Yeah. Fabulous. And Alan, I know you're as delighted as the rest of us, but the great thing for the public is to understand it, because a lot of the people out there do not understand, for example, the Holyrood voting system, which was created by unionists, the DeHont system. And it's important that we have allies and we're strategically placed on constituencies and on the list to make the most of this. And Sovereign joining here is just yet another fantastic thing for the entire independence movement. Right, Alan, did you get that question?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to inform the public of what the situation is. And to do that, we've got to look back into history as well. Not distant history, but in 2014, how did we manage to get the votes from 20-odd% up to 45%? That wasn't the political parties that did that. That was the grassroots movement. When the grassroots movement took over the campaign, the support for Scottish independence rocketed. Unfortunately, it was just slightly too late for us to do anything, so we got up to 45%, which was an exceptional result. Because you've got to remember, at that time, the SNP weren't handing out the blue books. The grassroots were handing out the blue book. the SNP were withholding canvass results. Now, one of the most important aspects of any campaign is information. And if you're running an election campaign, canvass results are so important to that campaign to make sure you can get your vote out. But coming on to the 2021 election, we tried to explain to people how the DeHunt system works. That if you had constituency MPs, MSPs elected, then that affected the vote list. So you had the SNP having the constituency and list votes totaling over 1 million and received 2 MSPs on the list. Now, we thought by having Alba there, we would give people a chance to split their vote for Scotland's sake. So as we could have had SNP constituency, Alba on the list. That would have reduced the unionists, the MSPs, by over 20 and increased the independents by over 20 in the Scottish Parliament. That's how you've got to do things. Now, where we are now, as we have discovered that ALPA at that stage wasn't the issue, that wasn't the solution to the problem. Because again, it's the party political system. The people of this country are sick and tired of normal political parties who always seem to put their interests before the interests of the country. And that's why our campaign is so different, because we've got ISP, now sovereignty, putting country before party. And that is what we are needing. We are needing proper people who are not looking for votes to make them MSPs. Seats in the Scottish Parliament are a byproduct of the votes. The votes we are seeking is votes for us to liberate our country. Nothing more, nothing less. Yes, we will have seats in the Parliament, but that is to push forward the people's votes, which is for an independent Scotland, not for us to sit on any gravy train. Each and every one of our candidates are standing to make themselves redundant as quickly as possible, because we will be seeking an independent election in an independent Scotland as soon as we possibly can. The normal political parties who are not joining the grassroots movement will never, ever get us there. We must bring out the vote, not just bring in the SNP voters from the constituency to the list, but those voters who are disillusioned, who are not coming out to vote because they do not like the party system. Well, now you have a choice. You have an organisation standing on constituency and on the list who are putting your interests and the interests of the country way above the interests of any political party. And I'd just like to clarify something that's been going around social media, because people are asking about the selection process of Liberation. The reason we are having selections is simply to ensure that every single one of our candidates are dedicated to the cause of Scottish independence. For far too long, we've had unionist infiltration within our movement. Liberate Scotland are not going to allow that within our movement. Every single person must be committed to Scottish independence and stand on a platform of independence, nothing less.
Absolutely, nothing less. I'm with that. People, David, will of course accuse us all of gaming the system. My contention is that the DeHunt system that was put in place was the unionists gaming the system from day one to ensure that there was never a majority, and they thought it would always be a unionist majority. They were gaming the system. We're just working the system. We're not gaming it.
We're still live, yes, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely. Look, if we while the SNP operated as a broad church party, and while its singular focus was attaining Scottish independence, it really was able to bring in Scots of all sorts of different political persuasions. But as it's gradually morphed into a devolutionist party, as it's got very comfortable in Holyrood with, let's face it, some quite nice salaries and a lot of perks, I think it's also at the same time it made its own political positions on an awful lot of issues, most of which have nothing to do with attaining independence, very clear. And it does self-define, as Alba does, as centre-left. Now, for us in sovereignty, that's a bit of an issue, because there are very many traditionalist, nationalist voters with a more conservative bent. They would self-describe as centre-right or right, and maybe even libertarian, that feel as though all of a sudden the independence movement or Scottish independence is not for them. And I think this goes, as Alan was saying, a little bit to the risk of the party system that we have at the moment. And that's, where I think sovereignty really has a role, because it doesn't matter what your political persuasions are, your ideological persuasions, and so on. Fundamentally, we're one people, we're a separate people and a distinct people, and that should be reflected in there being an independent Scottish state. And that is priority number one. And we don't want to lose centre-right and right-wing voters from the cause of Scottish independence. I think that's absolutely critical. And we've seen with the rise of reform that there is a strong, that outlook does have some weight behind it in a Scottish context. And I think there's a really critical difference as well between how left and right wing voters make their vote count. Maybe this is a bit of a crude generalization, but on the left, well, there's more of a sort of tendency to engage in tactical voting. So you look at on a seat basis of, maybe the Lib Dems or Labour have a better chance of winning the seat. Right-wing voters tend to put all their eggs in one basket. Maybe that's a bit of a crude generalization. And it used to be the Conservatives, and it's now going to be Reform, it looks like. But the point is that maybe the 20, 30, 35% of Scottish voters who are more right-leaning, that are voting as a bloc for unionist parties. They're cementing unionist parties' position in Scottish politics. And I think for us to, and I would say the same thing is true on the issue of the European Union. When the SNP came out and said, we're 100%, we're going to rejoin the European Union, and we are not even going to hold a referendum, despite the fact that Scotland at this point will be a newly independent country, and things will have changed. When they came out and said that, had a really alienating effect on those Scots in the independence movement that don't want to be part of the European Union. Now, our ultimate position is it should be a democratic process. It is a decision for after independence. And it should not, the SNP should not be taking such a hard line on it at this point. They should be saying, let's wait until after we become independent, and then let's have a national conversation about whether we want to join the EU or EFTA or the common market. Let's have that conversation then at that point. For them to take a really, really hard line on this issue at this point and say it's basically the purpose of becoming independent, then that is going to really alienate some Scots that are on the fence, and we cannot afford to lose Scots who are concerned about this issue, maybe who even prioritise this issue above others, because they'll say, well, there's no hope of independent Scotland remaining out with the European Union. So I think we have a role to play in that conversation. But our bottom line is we want to work with all parties and independents and the grassroots as a collected, united movement to push forward for action on getting independence over the line. As Ava said, if that has to be by UDI, then so be it.
Indeed. I would just say the SNP can go on about this, about the EU, but they can't. It's nonsense. And it's one, I would say it's down in the pecking order. If you ask the Scottish voters, the EU and that whole question is down 10. But the point is, the SNP, while saying that, are allowing free ports to come into Scotland. So you can't have free ports and get into the EU, so they're defeated. Their currency position is not the one that their conference took, which was a new Scottish currency. They've decided to stay with the pound. You cannot go into the EU with someone else's currency because it's not possible to go back in. And used to say the EU would want us in, and I don't think now. I mean, I was pro-EU. I'm not now. Absolutely not. After what I've seen, what they've done in places like Palestine and Ukraine, I'm not for them at all. But all the more reasons why Liberate and Eye for Eye and Sovereignty and ISP are doing this is because our party of so-called independents are not doing it. Now, I want to listen to this, folks, and we'll talk about it.
Sure is that I bring people together sufficiently so there's a compelling voice for independence in Scotland, a compelling and demonstrable demonstration of support for independence.
Well, what does that mean?
And that's
60% in the polls? What is a compelling and demonstrable display of support?
Well, if you look at the run-up to the 1997 election in Scotland, when there was demonstrable, clear a consensus of opinion that Scotland should have its own parliament within the United Kingdom. And what I want to make sure is that I lead the debate in Scotland in a way that brings people together to reach that conclusion that independence represents the best way forward for Scotland and that we should have the right to choose that.
Now, there's been a lot of controversy over that, Eva. Oh, he never said 75%. Well, the fact is, the run-up to that was the opinion polls, and the opinion polls were pretty accurate, because when the vote was over, the demonstrable position was that 75% of Scots had voted for devolution, and for taxes, it was a bit slightly lower for the tax-raising powers. So if he's now saying 75%, never going to happen, that means that 26% of unionists could hold Scotland to the Union forever.
Yeah, there's a good item written by Stuart Campbell, Wings Over Scotland, called The Undertaker, where he dissects exactly what was said and what may or may not have been meant by John Swinney. And unfortunately for John Swinney, Stuart Campbell's evidence, which is set out very plainly, is pretty comprehensive that John was saying, in fact, he was looking at levels of the mid-70s before he would consider that to be a demonstrable demonstration of support for independence. Very, very sad. Think back to 2013-14. Prior to that vote, support for independence was at about 28%. In the event, it came to 45% on the day, as we were all told. But currently, see, it's sabotage today because somebody comes to the door, the dogs start barking, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Would you please stop going to Eva's door during recording times? Goodness sake.
You're going to have to go on to somebody else, Roddy, sorry.
Put yourself on mute. I know with Indie for Indie, ISP, I'll allow David to speak for Sovereignty. We're 50% plus one vote, 50% plus one seat, whatever it is for the UDI. It's ridiculous, nonsense to suggest you've got to get up to the 75% levels.
There's a tacit, sorry, David, can I just briefly say, there's a tacit admission in John's 75% claim that in actual fact, he doesn't respect the SNP winning an election. If you're the leader of the Party of Independence and you win an election, you therefore have a mandate, maybe a limited mandate, but you have a limited mandate on independence. He's now effectively said that the SNP can win every election from now until doomsday, but if they don't achieve 75% of the vote, then he will take no action on independence. That is an extraordinary position for the leader of the SNP to put himself in. But I think it's an example, again, of John opening his mouth, giving away little secrets without understanding it, but also not actually thinking through what he's saying. Sorry, David.
He thinks he's playing Mr. Reasonable and, I'm being so reasonable. You're actually playing into the hands of everyone, including us. And I want to thank you on behalf of Liberate Scotland for saying that you won't do anything until it's 75%. We're doing it even if it's at 46% or 26%. We will be doing it till it gets to 50% plus one. No other figure needed, Alan, is there?
No. I mean, John Swinney is doing everything in his power to stop independence. I mean, his statement before that was continuing down the road of the trans-queer ideology. Now, he knows the vast majority of this independence movement vote for the SNP for one reason, and that is because they are supposed to be the independence party. It's the only thing they have never ever pushed, and it was the founding policy of the SNP was independence. Now he is doing everything in his power to try and put people off. What we are doing is saying to people, well, you now have an alternative. The SNP are independence by name. We are independence by action and deeds. We are not talk. We are action. And we are going to be out in the streets and we are going to be convincing people the benefits of independence. Because John Swinney is doing exactly the same as what they are doing in Westminster. The English are the mighty. They will tell us what to do, regardless of how much you support independence. Unless you've got, I mean, he's 75% this present time. And politicians, never listen to what politicians actually say, because the words never come out their mouth. Watch what they're doing, watch their actions, and listen carefully between the lines. Because to say it's got to be the same level as devolution is 75%. Well, 74% if you want to be pedantic. So always look at politicians and listen between the lines of what they're saying. But John Swinney is so much involved with devolution. It's like his baby. He doesn't want to see it end. But his actions will see an end to devolution. Because if we don't get independence very soon, the party that will be taking over government will be Reform. And they've already stated that they will remove the Scottish Parliament and they will Anglicise the entire nation of Great Britain. There will be no Scotland, there will be no Wales, there will be no Northern Ireland. It'll be England. We will then be referred to, as we were in the past, North Englandshire. So that's what John Swinney's pushing, whether he likes it or not. All we require for Scottish independence is a vote of 50.1%. That is a mandate. That is a majority. We will never, ever again bow the knee to foreign prince, whoever he be. And that includes Reform, because that is the danger to this country. It's not the Tories, it's not the Labour Party, despite how bad they are now. Because after the next election, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse, because you will have no NHS, you will have no local services, and you will have no Scotland. So people of Scotland, think very carefully in 2026. Are you going to play the silly party games, or are you going to put Scotland first? And if you're going to put Scotland first, you must elect independence for independence, ISP, sovereignty candidates on the constituency, and Liberate Scotland on the list. Put Scotland before party and make this country free.
Here. Well said, Alan. David, are you in any doubt what John was referring to there when he was talking about devolution? It couldn't be anything other than the high 70s, in my opinion. Do you differ? And our sovereignty of 50% plus one party too?
Yeah, so easy question, first of all, which is that we are 50% plus one vote. And with regards to John Swinney, I don't have any, I'm really racking my brain for what an alternative interpretation could be for what he says. And actually, the only convincing alternative is the one that Stu put out in the article called The Undertaker, where he said he actually meant 81%. So maybe we're being a little bit rash here, suggesting that 75 is the only possible interpretation, because it could be 81. But what does that actually mean? That's ridiculous. That's like saying unionists must be so smart that their vote is worth 3 times that of nationalists. Okay? He must have such a high opinion of unionist voters. My oh my, if he's going to give them that amount of power. That means that 26% of the electorate, a minority, can hold the other 74% hostage, essentially. It's a crazy position to hold. Well, the vote on Brexit was 50% plus one vote. Why should Scottish independence? Why should any future referendum, if that is how we achieve our independence, be anything else? Why let a minority in a democratic system hold a majority hostage? It makes very little sense to me. So, and I think in terms of what lies behind it, I maybe have a slightly different take on it to others, in the sense of I really think the SNP are stuck. I think they're not just playing for time because they have become devolutionists in some sense, and because they get great salaries being in Holyrood. They're comfortable with this stasis where nothing is happening, but they can basically endless call on independence supporting voters support at elections. They're not only doing it for that reason, but they really don't seem to have any sort of idea about how independence could come about when every parliamentary and judicial route to independence is being blocked by Westminster. And unfortunately, it means doing things that it means getting your hands dirty. It means doing things that are going to be taking you out of your comfort zone, your nice, comfortable Holyrood office. And if you take UDI as an example, if we go down that route and the answer is to basically say, we're not accepting your UDI, we all know what comes next. What comes next is a general strike. What comes next are mass demonstrations on the streets. Okay? What comes next is total disengagement with the institutions of the British state. It will not be pretty. It will be hard for us as a people to go through something like that, if that is the route by which independence comes about. But to basically just give up in the position of, the number one position of prominence for the independence movement, and as a quote unquote nationalist leader of Scotland, First Minister of Scotland, to give up so visibly and for basically no one to be fooled anymore is incredibly demoralizing. And it's why we need to get the SNP out of there and put in there people who are actually going to do the difficult stuff and get independence driven forward. And that's what we're all about. That's why we're delighted, as I say, to be joining with Liberate Scotland. Let's actually get a bit of action, folks.
Absolutely. And on this, Eva, I take it I'm having a wee bit of trouble with my pictures here. I was sending you messages, but you don't get them. There was a by-election this week, and I think we've got a graphic for it. Have we taken a graphic on the by-election in Clydebank? I think this might be. I'm scared to hit the button. I can't really see them very well just now. No, that's not the one. But we had a graphic. Anyway, there was a by-election in Clydebank, which the SNP held. Their vote was down 16%. Reform went up 20-odd%. Labour, it was 26% for Reform, 25% drop for Labour. The Unionist vote, as David's alluded to, went straight to Reform. The SNP vote stayed at home, as again, they won the seat. Poor old Alapa down there at 2%. Now, it shows that when you add the Alapa, and even if you want to include the Greens into it, they don't get anywhere near 50%. And that's why we've got to have unity to get the 50%.
You see, this takes me back again to that Wings Over Scotland item that David also referred to, the Undertaker, because in the closing paragraphs of that item, Stuart Campbell refers to the fact that since 2021, we've had an independent supporting majority in Holyrood, but it didn't move the dial at all insofar as there was ever any strategy for attaining independence or regaining independence, rather. What we had instead was, prior to that election, we had the announcement from Nicola Sturgeon in January 2020 that there would be an independence convention. We'd had Mike Russell's 11-step process. We had Jamie Hepburn as an independence minister. We had a few pamphlets on independence. And in 2024, we had my own MSP, Keith Brown, promising again that there would be an independence or a constitutional convention. None of these promises have ever come to pass. And it's because the SNP make promises that they don't deliver that their popularity has plummeted by about 20 points. You cannot keep promising the same thing to the electorate, fail to deliver, and still expect to win. It doesn't work like that anymore. And what will happen in Scotland, I have no doubt, is that people are so sick, fed up with the SNP over-promising and under-delivering. They're so scunnered with a lack of competent government. They're so cheesed off with the performances that they see in Holyrood every week, and so absolutely disappointed, heart sick of promises that aren't fulfilled, that they will give the SNP a bloody nose. And they'll either do it by staying at home, or they'll come out and vote for AN other. And because independence is so very vital to the future of our country, it's a lifesaver for many people, as well as a life enhancer, obviously. Because it is so vital, we need to have Liberate Scotland and a united movement, because in the real world, support for independence is already over 50%. The question is, how do you motivate people to come out and have the confidence in knowing that they're going to elect freedom fighters who will actually strain every sinew to keep independence at the top of the political agenda and have a plan, a route map, a strategy, a process mapped out by which method independence will actually be attained? Because John Swinney has said nothing, not one word about how independence will be regained, other than to say that it would be unfair and, in essence, not British, not cricket, to refuse another Section 30 referendum. Well, those are British rules, and that's what's wrong. He seeks to play, or to pretend to play, by British rules, when he should be writing the Scottish rules of the Scottish game for the Scotland team. And that should be a united campaign where he speaks to us and to others who have already joined us and others who are waiting in the wings to join us, and talk about how the ordinary people of Scotland, for once, after a very long time, actually get what they want, deserve and need. And it's a parliament of people who will all take power, take control and convert an independence majority vote and a majority of MSPs for independence into actually delivering self-determination for our country. And there is little evidence that at the moment John Swinney is motivated to be part of that team who are determined to deliver, preferably in 26. But deliver we will, no matter how long it takes.
Yeah, on that by-election, Lloyd, all the party, I've got to say, Reform were the only party that could take anything away from that. The SNP vote was down substantially. The Labour Party vote disappeared. Tories are languishing down as a fringe party. The Greens were down, Alba on 2%. But the biggest winner of it all was the Apathy Party again. 75% of those who were eligible voted with their feet and stayed at home and voted apathy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And probably the most depressing element of all of the by-elections over the past year to 18 months is the continued drop, most especially when they are like this Clydebank by-election in an area of multiple deprivation. You know, these are the same people who in 2014, or the children even of the people in 2014 who came out and voted yes to independence, and who have been continually let down.
Yeah.
And if you analyse, I mean, I don't want to really stick on this single by-election because the turnout was less than 25%. The margins of winning are an expression of anger and frustration more than they are anything else. They're an indicator that the Scottish National Party no longer has the troops on the ground to be able to even motivate its own vote, because I know from past experience that particular ward has a much, much higher SNP vote than turned out. And we can see that from the drop in numbers. But it indicates that the party is not working. So let's get back to the bigger picture. If that's happening in 10, 15, 16 by-elections over the past 18 months, the indicators are that the Scottish National Party's election mechanism, or its election machine, despite a much larger membership, is no longer competent in the way that it was, even just 10 years ago. Now, that says that people are disengaging not only from voting, but they're disengaging from party activity as well. Now, if someone in the SNP does not have the understanding to recognise that and fix that, then they must be aware that they are on a slippery slope to complete oblivion. Maybe not the next election or the one after that, but there's people in the SNP. John's been around long enough to know that you look at those numbers and you know what the problem is. And it's not just about turnout, it's about turnout of your own people, turnout of your own voters, but more importantly than that, turnout of your own activists. And if you're in that situation, you need to address it. But that has not been addressed for 10 years because it doesn't suit the leadership of the Scottish National Party to have an active, engaged, and questioning activist base. Basically, the SNP of old. That doesn't suit them anymore because they get asked hard questions that they may not be able to answer, because the real problem with the SNP since November 2014 is the complete de-intellectualisation of the party, the removal entirely of critical and rational thinking, not just on policy, but on presentation and about goals, which is why we find ourselves in the situation that we are in now. I mean, I despair in thinking, as I looked at that list of approved SNP candidates for next year's election, I look at it and I see a desert. I see people who are followers, not leaders. I see people who lack ideas of their own, who give me the impression that to be in politics is, as I've said on many occasions before, it's a new form of the entertainment business. It's show business by other means. They get their article in the newspaper, they get on television, they get on debate night. And for some people of a particular attitude, that's enough. And in some ways that has been fostered. It was fostered, that entertainment showbiz approach to politics was fostered during the period of the cult of Nicola Sturgeon, carried on with Hamza Yousaf and John Swinney doing it now. In the end, if you treat the people with the contempt that the SNP, for my money, is currently treating the electorate, particularly those at the lower end of the scale, if you continue to treat people with that level of contempt, then in actual fact, you're doing the unionists work for them, because those people are not excited to come out and vote. They don't trust you anymore. And I think the real central problem that we, or not we, but the solution is there. The solution is the unification of those parts of the movement which are not in complete thrall to the Scottish National Party. And in some ways, we need to look into the 26th election on the basis that unless the Scottish National Party is prepared to come into a coalition based on the idea of independence and nothing less, then it's in a terminal decline. And there will come a point where certain members of that party, particularly their elected members, will recognise the terminal decline and they'll want a change of direction. An example of terminal decline and a change of direction is the fact that so many of the Westminster members of the Scottish National Party have chosen to stand for the Holyrood election because they see the terminal decline in terms of the Westminster seats. And in some ways, will we be getting anything out of the Westminster people that we don't already get from the Holyrood people? No, we won't. But the positivity going into next year's election is the building of a coalition of the willing. And that coalition of the willing is the willing to stand up for the country before the party.
Yeah. But what it does highlight this by-election, Alan, the low turnout, as we say, it's been constant, this just wasn't a one-off, is that we in Liberate Scotland have got a hard job in front of us to get the people enthused again. And that really has got to be the number one task of us, is to get the people enthusiastic again about politics.
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems in politics just now is people staying at home. Now, by-elections are bad enough, but let's go back to the last general election. Labour's vote was 851,897 votes. The SNP, who had the second largest vote, was 724,758. We know for a fact that 750,000 yes supporters did not come out and vote in that election. That's more people staying at home than coming out and voting for the SNP, who is self-proclaimed independence party. So that shows the myth of the SNP, that standing candidates against them split the vote. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Voting for the SNP now splits the independence vote, because there's more independent supporters now not supporting the SNP than there are supporting them. So we must get out every single one of these 750,000, and the others who are supporting the so-called independence party must think very clearly: is it really worth your while making the same mistake as you have done for the last 10 years? Because nothing has happened by doing the same thing. Think outside the box and come on board with Liberate Scotland, and let's get together, unite, and it's the only way we are actually going to free the party. But the SNP aren't helping to motivate people to come out and vote, because they have candidates, such as one in, I believe it was an Edinburgh seat, putting out posts saying she is the Barbie for Hollywood. Well, Scotland has an awful lot of all of us who are suffering in poverty, who need that dealt with, rather than you making a mockery of our political system. Start concentrating on the real issues of Scotland. Concentrate on the poverty that your party has done very little to solve. Concentrate on the drug problem in this country that your party have not listened to the professionals on. Start dealing with the homelessness of this country, because we need our people safe and secure in houses, rather than having children living in temporary accommodation, having to be transferred from school to school, affecting their education. We need independence. So let's get serious about this and stop your nonsense.
Yeah, she's actually the same one I remember during the last election for Holyrood, where she was standing beside Nicola's bus and saying, "Time to get on the gravy train bus." An absolute airhead. We don't need them. David, you looked at the by-election results, I'm sure, like the rest of us. I go back, the Apathy Party won it by a landslide, but it is a task of ours that we have to enthuse the voters to get them back onto that feeling of 2014, where they're actually, it's worthwhile getting out and getting involved in politics.
Yeah, so if the apathy, let's look at it slightly a different way. And I think it's an opportunity. If the Apathy Party was getting 10 or 15%, you would go, oh, boy, people are really quite happy with their elected representatives. Everyone's got someone to vote for. The 75%, they're our people. You know, we just need to give them hope, belief, and great candidates to vote for, and results will start going our way. I want to do something a little bit different. I mean, we give the SNP a really hard time, but I actually want to, with these results, call out one of the unionist candidates. So I'll try and make this as factual as possible, non-emotive. I mean, I don't want to make any aspersions of his motivations. The Liberal Democrat candidate is a young man called Cameron Stewart, very personable, pretty smart, formerly worked for Ruth Davidson, and shortly after he joined Sovereignty, well, pretty much immediately, challenged me for the leadership of the party, and that was in the run-up to our National Congress. Well, he lost the vote for the leadership. Now, a few years down the line, he's standing for the Liberal Democrats. So I'm not going to cast any aspersions on his motivations. But I think someone like that should come forward and say, explain to us what is the intellectual journey that he has been on to take him from a quote-unquote nationalist working for the Scottish Conservatives to joining Sovereignty and almost immediately wanting to take over the party, take over the leadership of the party. Now, a few years down the line, he's standing for the Liberal Democrats. So I'm just putting the facts out there. The gentleman's name is Cameron Stewart. I would love to hear from him, right? Get yourself on, maybe come on this show and explain what is going on there. But for me, something like that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. I understand that people flip from unionist to nationalist. most people don't immediately flip back again. Maybe he could come on and explain what is going on.
I have had an open invitation for unionists to come on here. Funnily enough, only one has ever taken up the offer, and he's not come back for more. But it is open, and anyone from the SNP as well, apart from, of course, Lloyd here, who's SNP with us every week. As usual, the clock's kicking on and going to beat us, so I'm going to shuffle things about just a wee bit, Eva, if I may, because we always want to have reasons why we need, and say to the people why we've got to get out. And I want to bring two things in. It's actually for our cousins in Wales. But for this read for Scotland, every bit of it is important. And firstly, a wee video. Liz Saville, great Welsh Plaid Cymru MP.
Saville Roberts.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker.
Typical absolute arrogance of the Anglos and the disdain towards that bit of misogyny thrown in as well. But it's an underlying message to us in the colonies, because here's a reform leaflet which is talking about what they're going to do with Wales, and we were talking about it earlier a wee bit. Abolish the Senate. They'll abolish Holyrood, folks. One UK team for all sporting events. Tartan Army, are you watching? Scottish rugby team, are you watching? Are you watching this? One anthem, no more Flower Scotland, no more the best one in the country, our friends down in Wales. We're going to have the old dirge of God Save the Latest King. One language for Great Britain, so you're not allowed to speak Welsh or Gaelic. This is the reform government you're possibly going to get. You won't be allowed to be Irish Erse. I don't know how they're going to stop the boats, or maybe they're going to get Caledonia McBrain involved. Britain first. Scrap the 20-mile-an-hour limit outside schools, and let's knock down some kids. Remove the Welsh language signing and funding. They'll do the same with the Gaelic folks. Union Jacks, the butcher's apron everywhere, folks, in all your buildings. No saltires to be seen ever again. It will be outlawed. Scrap free prescriptions and bus passes, so you have to pay for your medicine like the English. And one nation brand. Brand, wonderful. What do you make of that, Eva?
I need to say to you, Roddy, I think David needs to leave now.
Is David going to leave the room?
Well, yes, I'm really sorry. I will need to make my apologies and leave shortly. I just want to approach what Reform are doing from the point of view of Scottish history. I often think about the question of how will we view the Unionist years after we regain our independence? Okay, and it's a really interesting question. How will those years be taught in the schools? And for me, I hope we don't look back on the 300 plus years of being in Union as being a time of just a time when Scots didn't care. Our ancestors over the past 300 years have kept alive Scottish Gaelic. They've kept Scottish culture alive and thriving and flourishing. And they have held on to traditional Scottish song and poetry and Scots as a language and the Scottish accent. We have maintained our distinctiveness over all these centuries, despite a huge effort, essentially, to homogenize British culture. So these are heroic years in some ways. And now what is happening is that attempt to suppress Scottish distinctiveness is being given political form. But there will be an equal and opposite reaction. I would say a greater reaction from the Scottish people under this context and any other where the attempt is ramped up to crush our national identity and our cultural distinctives. And if Reform attempts something similar in Scotland, it is game over. Independence will be over the line faster than you know it, because what the past 3+ centuries have shown is that the Scottish people are never ready to let go of their culture, their language, their outlook on the world, and our national unity. So I have a huge amount of belief in the fundamental the values, the heart of the Scottish people. I think we're closer than we realise, despite all the discouragement that we see from the putative leadership of the independence movement. And just as a final thing, I would say to people is get involved. You enjoy the show, great. You give it likes, subscribe, that's all good. But if we're going to get independence over the line, get involved. Ultimately, it's your involvement with organizations, your involvement with your friends, with your neighbors, pushing the case for Scottish independence, instilling belief in others around you that is going to make all the difference. Please, 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 in the lead up to this election, don't sit on the sidelines. There are some absolutely tremendous initiatives out there. Liberate Scotland is trying to bring all of those together. Join one of the parties, join all the parties if they'll let you. Get behind Salvo, get behind Liberation. If you have an academic bent, get involved in SSRG. These are super organizations. Please don't sit on your hands. This is a crucial moment in our nation's history. And our final plea is to you, to the listeners, to get involved. If you want to follow us, we're at sovereignty.scot.
Yeah, well said. And I know you have to go. I should just explain to you, ladies and gentlemen, David is babysitting his 5 children, and he has got to leave the room before the place is burnt down or something. I don't know. David, thank you. We'll see you again. Eva, what did you make of all that Welsh? We're going to literally eradicate, ethnic cleanse Wales and Welshness out of the English Union.
That's reform pushing the Welsh people further and further towards their own independence. I mean, you know that last month there was an opinion poll that showed that support for independence in Wales was at 41%, which I think is the highest that it's been in modern times. So that's the direction of travel for the Welsh. Not dissimilar to experiences in Scotland. But the attitude of reform is nothing other than sheer arrogance and ignorance. It's almost like bullying. It's beyond right wing. It's eradication of cultures, of a people, of hopes, of heritage, of all the things that create nationhood, all the different aspects of status that are taken into account in, for example, an application to the United Nations if you want to be decolonised. So obviously Scotland started down that road because we can tick all the boxes. The Welsh can do it too because they have their own language, their own geographical extent, their own culture, their own history. The Welsh are a people and they deserve Welshness to remain alive and thriving, notwithstanding and in spite of these machinations from a party that is proven itself to be electable democratically, but because to a large extent it's apathy again that's getting them there, and it's the scurriment of the population that is leading their drive. Hopefully that worm will turn, but if it gives a spur and a kick up the jacksie to those in the independence movements in Wales and in Scotland, then all to the good.
Yeah. Lloyd, I mean, if there's anyone who had any doubt about English nationalism and they're scared, we don't want to be seen to be anti-English. The fact of the matter is, it's the people down there are more anti-Celtic. They look upon all the Celtic nations as inferior to them. And these are reconstructed Tories. They've always been about, they've just switched their label. That they will do to Scotland as well.
There's no question about that, Roddy. But I mean, just on the issue of how Reform see Wales, it's absolute political cynicism. They know, because the polarisation between the Welsh and the Tories who live in Wales is much harsher than it is in Scotland. Much harsher. If you look at any of the local newspapers, every single day there will be a letter in about the waste of money on Welsh education. Every single day there are criticisms of the Welsh culture by people who have moved to Wales. And all that Reform are doing is appealing directly to those horrible little English nationalists who live in Wales. And it's cynical because they know they can't win the majority in Wales, but if they take all the Tory votes and a bit of the Labour vote that comes from that same kind of colonial settler kind of grouping, then they could take charge in the Senate. And it appeals across the border into England to say that you're going to shut the Senate down. And it's cynicism, nothing more, nothing less. But on your substantial point, if your history, the history that you are taught, tells you that you created the greatest cultural and political empire in world and human history, you dominated the world, conquered that world, and pillaged and plundered it because you are the greatest people on earth, then of course you're going to have the attitude of England first. But unfortunately, here in Britain, they've got the cover of Britishness, and you know, there is no such thing as Britishness except as a cover for Greater England. That's all there is to it. And I mean, in some ways, I feel slightly sorry for an awful lot of English people, because they grow up with an expectation that their country is so marvellous and so fantastic that each day they're waiting to reap the bounty of that. And in reality, they'll end up in their box and 6 feet under before they'll reap any bounty from it. It's the greatest contract in some ways in Britain is the illusion that has been given to the English working class that somehow they hold a special place in history, and that they should and are admired, when in reality they are the most duped of all of us on these islands.
Yeah, but it's because of that very thing that the people like Farage and the Tories and Labour before them have been able to. Italy should be great in this greatest country in the world if it wasn't for the Muslim, if it wasn't for the unemployed, if it wasn't for the dinghies, if it wasn't for the whinging jocks, the paddies, everything would be great. It's always someone else's fault. Don't look up here. We live in a feudal government system, folks. That's the problem. And the union is a feudal system. It's not a democracy, and it has to be smashed. But the clock's kicking on, Alan, and last to you. This what they trying in Wales, this English nationalism is getting pushed, because we're getting more and more people up every year. And every year we don't go for independence, there's more English nationalist votes arriving in our country. We are going to get swamped with this same stop your Gaelic, stop your road signs, no more Scotland football or anything.
But one of the biggest problems that we have is this country that has got a lot of homeless, but also has a lot of second homes from English people buying them up here and registering to vote. Because a lot of them are registered to vote, and they're raking money in on renting those properties out. Well, we have people who are homeless. But what Reform are proposing, now they've actually said that you are now a colonised nation, because everything they're going to take away from us, like Eva said, shows that we are actually a colony. But they're now entering into cultural genocide, because they are trying to remove that from us forcibly. Now, unfortunately, and I will guarantee this, the thing that will probably upset most people in the proposals is removing the Scottish football team, which shows how sad affairs we have in this country, where people are more concerned about their football team than their actual culture, their language, and the nation as a whole. But but we have a major problem with Reform as in general, because I mean, what are they going to do if they don't actually become a government? They become a coalition. Are they going to do what their predecessors from another country did once before? Are they going to burn down the parliament so that we don't have one to go into? Because that's how these fascists operate. They take away the system of power that you have to change. And that they also push the problems on, like what you said, Roddy, to all the other ethnics, minorities and things, when the real problem is the parliament they are defending. Those are the ones who make the rules. Those are the ones who make the laws. And those are the ones who are corrupt to the core, covering up the paedophilia and the corruption for every single one of their friends. It's not the ethnics who are coming over here. It's certainly not the asylum seekers who are coming over here. Because do you know how to stop asylum seekers? Stop blowing their bloody country up. That's how you stop it. Invest in their countries. Help them to build their countries up. Help them to fix their infrastructure. Don't throw them out of this country when it is us who are paying and helping to blow them out of their own country. You want to stop asylum seekers? Leave them alone. Stop interfering in their politics and stop interfering in their running of their country. Concentrate on our country and build our country up. Start building houses here. Improve the health service here. Improve the education. Make life better here for our citizens instead of making it worse and blaming someone else.
Yeah, yeah. You're getting quick. Well, you were on a roll there, Alan. You were on a roll. But I would say, I've always said, and I'll continue to say it, the danger to the Union is not Scottish, Welsh or Irish nationalism. It always has been English nationalism that they overstep. And I think with what they're talking about in Wales could be the overstep. But we mustn't be complacent. You know, you've heard it throughout this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. You need to get involved. No good sitting home going, this is great, this is great. If you don't do anything to help it, you've got to get involved. No matter how little you think you're able to do physically or whatever, or time-wise, doesn't matter. Every little bit. You know what they say about many a mickle makes a muckle. So get stuck in, get active. And until we see you again, and be that Wednesday when I've got the wonderful Anne-Marie Ward on as my special guest midweek. And that should be a really enlightening show. And I look forward to seeing you and yours then. Take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.